Polar bears are naturally territorial, so it's no surprise that they'd behave aggressively toward other animals in their natural habitat. Polar bears are the largest carnivore on land, after all, and they can be a serious threat to others, like sled dogs. And when a bear is territorial and hungry, well, it usually doesn't bode well for the dog. Canada resident Brian Ladoon knows that all too well. He lives on a sprawling property along the shores of the Hudson Bay area, where he keeps 150 sled dogs. The only real threats his dogs face are hungry polar bears who wander onto his land. So when an enormous polar bear approached Brian's beloved pack one afternoon, he assumed the worst. Two animals that would likely never get along are bears and dogs. Both can be territorial and aggressive, and when they encounter each other, it rarely ends well. Canada resident Brian Ladoon knows all about the threats that bears pose, but he wasn't prepared for what happened when he watched an enormous polar bear lumber over to some of his sled dogs one afternoon. Brian lives in the Hudson Bay area of Canada, where he owns a sprawling plot of isolated land, along with 150 sled dogs. There are no nearby neighbors. It's literally a small town consisting only of Brian and his pack. The dogs are relatively safe on Brian's property. The only threat they need to be aware of is polar bears, since hungry bears will make their way onto the land looking for a snack. Luckily, it doesn't happen often. Unfortunately, when it does, it could mean trouble for both Brian and his dogs. Also, if you've not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to get inspired by these animal stories every day. Now, back to the story. On one particularly cold afternoon, Brian was preparing something to eat inside when he heard a commotion outdoors. He peered out his window and gasped. There, just a few hundred feet from his front door, was an enormous polar bear, and the animal was tearing apart all of his dog crates. Bears have a sky-high curiosity quotient and tend to ask questions with their teeth and paws, which is why they sometimes tear up human campsites, said Tom Smith, a wildlife biologist and advisory scientist with Polar Bears International. But he added that this is also a time of year when polar bears, which depend on sea ice for hunting seals, have essentially been starving for months. Brian watched in horror as the powerful bear pulled apart the plastic siding like it was tissue paper. He knew polar bears roamed the area from time to time, but none of them had ever destroyed his property before. However, it wasn't the plastic cages Brian was worried about. His dogs were chained up outside, and he knew they were no match for an angry polar bear. At first, the bear seemed to be completely preoccupied with the plastic carrying cages. Brian hoped that the animal would expend all of his energy ruining the cages and would eventually wander off, realizing that there was no food in the crates. Suddenly, the bear dropped the cage it was chewing on and turned to face Brian's home. The bear clearly wasn't finished exploring, and now he was heading straight for Brian's front yard where his dogs were chained up nearby. As soon as the dogs spotted the bear, they began ferociously barking. This only intrigued the bear even more. The polar bear was quickly closing in on Brian's sled dogs, and the man knew he was no match for the massive animal. The only thing he could do was brace for the worst. It must have been an absolute nightmare watching a vicious polar bear walk toward animals who were just a fraction of its size. Brian was shocked when he saw how the bear reacted to his dogs. The bear gingerly patted a chained sled dog. The Huffington Post lauded its cuteness factor. The man who shot the video praised the bear for showing that kind of heart toward another animal. But reality soon intervened. Canada's CBC News reported that officials had removed 3 polar bears from the same property in Churchill after one killed and ate another dog. The owner of the site, who raises the sled dogs, told the network that the slaughter had occurred on the only day we didn't feed the bears, the only night we didn't put anything out. The irony of the two incidents spawned commentary on the perils of the attributing human emotions to animals and imposing a moral code the creatures can't possibly be expected to live up to. They also renewed anger at the owner of the site, Brian Ladoon, who has long been a target of animal rights activists and conservationists who decry his chaining of dogs and luring of polar bears for tourist photo ops. To me, it's like it's trying to see if the food's ready or not, Smith said, laughing. It's not surprising that it would try to explore this dog, but I guarantee if you left that bear there long enough, it would say, I wonder what this dog tastes like. I'd be sorely disappointed in a bear that didn't ultimately eat that dog. To be clear, there is no indication that the bear is the one that ate a dog, or that the dog is the dog that was eaten. A Manitoba Sustainable Development spokesperson told CBC that authorities had removed the bear that killed a dog from Ladoon's Mile 5 dog sanctuary, as well as a mother and a cub, because there were allegations the bears were being fed and the female's behavior was becoming a concern. Which means that, yes, the bear and the dog probably did peacefully coexist for at least a few moments. And Smith said that doesn't surprise him either. That's because bears are highly trainable and extremely motivated by food. But that doesn't necessarily mean that polar bears see the world purely through meat-colored lenses. Smith referred to them as animals that aren't social by nature, but also aren't antisocial. He said he has seen them lounge around and play pat-a-cake with one another. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with your friends and family. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.